Doc on the Run. We help injured runners run. Today's episode is based on a question sent in from a runner who wanted to know whether or not it made sense to do what we call periodization when recovering from a running injury. This concept's pretty simple. In fact, if you've ever trained for a marathon or you're training for any event, you have probably done this yourself already. All we're talking about is the staggering of your growth periods during your workouts that will basically decrease your risk of injury because you ramp up for a period of time, let's say 3 or 4 weeks, where you're increasing your speed, increasing your intensity, increasing your mileage week after week after week. And then after a period of about 3 weeks or so, you drop back down, decrease your activity, and then you start to ramp up again. That's what periodization is. You take a period where you are increasing your activity, then you back off and start increasing again from a lower point to allow yourself to recover fully and decrease your risk of sustaining an overtraining injury. For most runners, when they're working toward a marathon training program or an Ironman training program or something like that, the period of growth is usually about 3 weeks. Now, you should do a similar thing when you are recovering from a running injury, but that period can be much shorter because your increases are happening during a period where you're actually healing, recovering, forming collagen bonds, all of the stuff that happens when you are actually healing and recovering from a running injury. So yes, in short, to answer the question, I do think it's a good idea, but those periods have to be much shorter when you're actually healing a running injury. So if you're returning to running and you have been off, you've been on crutches or something like that, then yes, you should do some sort of periodization. You want to ramp up your activity, drop down, and ramp back up again. Now, the important follow-up question that he asked, of course, was whether or not it made sense to do that for 1 week or a month or how long the period should be. And I think that as a general rule, although I don't really think one rule fits anything ever in medicine, as a general rule, it's probably better if you ramp up your activity for about a week and then you drop back down. So if you're doing exercises and you're just returning to running, and you've been ramping up a little bit, those increases are going to be fairly abrupt. You might go from running 1 mile to 3 miles to 5 miles or something like that. And that's a fairly large increase in distance and time on your feet. So you would then drop back down to something less when you start ramping up the next week. You don't want to just ramp straight up and have this linear progression when you're recovering from a running injury. You want to give your body a chance to recover. You want to take a couple of days off, and when you ramp up again and you begin ramping up, you ramp up from a lower point than where you finished the previous Friday. So yes, in short, I think periodization in recovery when you're healing a running injury does make a lot more sense. It's just that the period should be shorter, the rests should be more frequent, and in a sense, those little ramp-up periods are going to be a lot shorter on your calendar than when you're actually training for an event like a marathon or an Ironman triathlon. And one other point to mention, though, of course, is that when you're returning to running, one of the most crucial things to pay attention to is your pain. That's what's really telling you whether or not you're making progress or you're about to sustain a setback. So pay really close attention to your pain when you're doing this periodization application in your return to running. Doc on the Run. We help injured runners run.